Hello, everyone. I'm Joan Kerr, and this is WorldCanvass from International Programs. Glad to have you with us. We're coming to you from the University Capitol Center in downtown Iowa City, room 2780, if you'd like to stop by. And I'll begin by thanking our partners, UITV, the University of Iowa Pentecrest Museums, KRUI-FM, and Information Technology Services. This program is being recorded for statewide television and radio distribution over UITV, Iowa Public Radio, and KRUI-FM. Our topic tonight is Starving for Water, the global water crisis and its impact on food and health. We have an amazing group of guests with us this evening who will consider from multiple vantage points water and its relationship to the environment, global health, development, and the rights of individuals and communities. In the words of UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, more people die from unsafe water than from all forms of violence, including war. These deaths are an affront to our common humanity and undermine the efforts of many countries to achieve their development potential. According to the U.S. Agency for International Development website, water covers almost 3/4 of the Earth's surface, yet nearly 1 billion people in the world do not have access to safe water. In just 20 years, the world's demand for fresh water will outstrip supply by 40%. Those without safe water and sanitation are likely to be poor, hungry, and malnourished. Each day, thousands of people, mostly children under 5, die from preventable diarrheal diseases. The increasing scarcity of safe water, combined with rapid worldwide population growth and environmental degradation, is also contributing to biodiversity loss and food insecurity. That's what our program's about tonight, and we hope to be able to not only illuminate some of the water challenges to people and the planet, but to offer some solutions. I mentioned the planet and people, but what about the animal world? Obviously, animals need a healthy planet to survive, and we're going to start this evening's program with a collection of animal songs, poems by Marvin Bell, set to music by David Gompper. Stephen Swanson's our baritone. Please welcome our guests.
How many we were, American buffalo. How large we are, each and all, how many we were. So very many, too many to count, stampeded to the buffalo jump. We were made to be your heavy coats. We were the meat, we were the leather, we were the sinew for bows, we were the grease, we made the dung for your fires, we were the hooves turned into glue. We were the last of the marrow in hard times too. We wallowed to groom, we huddled in herds, we thundered and we frightened the birds. We fought off the wolves and the grizzlies, we ran through the loops away from men, thundering to get free. We gave you clothing, we gave you heat, we gave our hides to shelter, we were too good to you, we gave you what to eat. In the storybooks we stood until we were hollow bodies and brittle bones. Then we collapsed from within. Look for a kind at the top of the medicine wheel. Once we had a future that is not the future we have. Still we have a past that will remain a past. We jumped our heavy bodies over the cliffs. We have learned not to run. We gave you your first flute. If you would sing of life, let it be of life and death. We gave you a wing bone that bore 5 holes for your breath. Oh, if you would sing of life, let it be of life and death. We who eat carrion, who eat the carcasses of buffalo and of stork and peacock, we who dine on raw leftovers, we are fit to make music, to sing of it, celebrate the ones who will be there when you need me. I'll be there, I'll be there, I will be there when you need me. When life is over, I'll be there. I'll look into the white to see me. I am the loneliness of a polar bear as the ice melts beneath me. I am the far beauty in an aviator's eyes, but he is not beautiful to me. Look down here where I walk in the vast vacant air that surrounds me. I scare the Finnish countryside. The spirit of your forefathers is in me. walking alone in the unframed cold. A bit seen, but in the main this unseen me. I have not seen the beauty that you see. I have not seen your love or care of me. If ever you truly see me, you will draw me even larger. I patrol the very top of a dying planet. I am not eternal. I am dying because I am not you. Because I am me. I am the dead leg, the granddaddy. I am the corked thigh, does it hurt? Oh, horse that excels in warfare, I am not thee. Oh, peaceful beasts of burden, I am not thee, not thee. I trot inside your quadriceps, I snort, you moan. I canter up and down. Oh, I prance when you wince. I am an animal too, because I am you. Do you have feelings for me? You must have feelings for me. Because I am you, because I am you too. Because I am you, I am you too. I am an animal too, because I am you too. I am the horse of the deep purple. I am the horse sense of your flesh. Can you feel my untrod hoofs? I can feel your hand calming me. Oh, hear me whinny and neigh. Shall I live inside you all day? Am I not real if I feel what you feel? You have your sawhorses, your thoroughbreds. Why then are there sawhorses? Why are there gift horses? If not to enlarge the bestiary, confess that you gave birth to me. I am a tiny piece of your bad luck. I am alive within you. Call me Chuck.
So we're going to bring Stephen Swanson over here to talk for a second. Thank you, David Gompper. David Gompper composed all the music to go along with Marvin Bell's poems there. So hi. I don't know if we need to adjust that mic or not, but so Stephen, thank you very much for singing these songs. And
I should have announced the names before I sang them.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Well, it's too late now. The first one was called American Buffalo, which you probably got. The second is the vulture. The third is the polar bear. And the fourth is the only kind of non-animal, which is the Charlie horse, which I hoped you'd get the idea of trotting around inside your quadricep and things like that. If I got my diction out good enough, you probably did.
Yeah, no, they were great. And actually, I had told you at just a casual gathering we were at some time ago that there was a program coming up on this whole notion of water challenges around the world, the environment, and so on. And you said, some of the work we've recently done really speaks to that because it's all about animals in the natural world.
Exactly. And for me, the one that fit obviously into this was the polar bear. And the idea of the melting ice caps and this great animal that's become kind of the symbol of our major problems right now with global warming. And I just love the way David captured that text. And first of all, Marvin wrote a marvelous text. But you can hear the ice melting in the background. Yeah. Drip, 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 drip of the water.
Yeah.
And it's just a terrific setting. And the whole idea, this actually came off of a larger recital that involved French work and German work and some cabaret songs that basically we're going back to the whole idea of how man relates to animals is really kind of a picture of how man relates to man. And so we start with the things like the eradication of the buffalo and even going through the whole circle of life thing with the vulture, the idea that the vulture is not, for some reason we have this image of this terrible, frightening thing, and he says, no, I'm not there. I'm there to help the circle complete. And it's interesting that Marvin wrote some of his most beautiful texts, and David wrote this exquisite setting for it, for an animal that really pretty much scares us. And the idea is to get back farther into nature to realize where we really do fit in this thing, that we're just one big part of the whole creation, and we do not get to stand up aside from this and just do what we want with it, because what we watch what happens to the animals as we do what we want with it is really the canary in the mine shaft, and we need to take serious notice of what's going on.
Well, thank you for starting off our program so beautifully. Thank you, Stephen Swanson, David Gompper.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. I'd like to invite our next guests up now, and we're going to do some conversation in this next segment about Iowa's water resources, both the rich resources we have and also the challenges we have to water and to our soils and whatnot. And Bob Libra is the state geologist, state of Iowa, and he has joined us this afternoon to share some of his insights after years and years of working on water and land issues here in Iowa. Give us a little primer on where we stand here in Iowa.
A little primer. I think maybe the best way to start is to think of our water in the different kinds of sources we have. If most people are most familiar with water that they can see, it's out on the land surface. So we're here just up the hill from the Iowa River. We have rivers and lakes and reservoirs and wetlands. They're fed by rain. The water does its run downhill thing, feeds them, keeps them running. We also have sources of water that are underground. So the rain falls and percolates down there. You don't get to see that one, but it's going on all the time. And that water slowly makes its way, it kind of percolates along, and it runs downhill because water really likes to do that. And it's heading towards those rivers and lakes. So if it hasn't rained for a long time, the reason the Iowa River still has water in it is because of that underground water feeding to it. And that's what kind of happens near the surface, okay? And if we go deep down in the ground, we have groundwater sources there too. We call them aquifers. They can be down sometimes a few thousand feet. They're not fed by modern rain. It's old water. Some people call it fossil water. Some people call it paleo water. It's probably thousands, tens of thousands of years old. Some places probably even older. And that water is really kind of cut off from everything we do at the surface. That's a good news and a bad news thing. It's not replenished, but it's kind of isolated and safe. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the pieces we deal with. Mm-hmm. And then when we look at issues of water or how the water in the state is doing, you can kind of come at it from two sides. How much do we have and how good is it? The quantity or quality of the water. And we tend to think of Iowa most of the time as a pretty water-rich state, pretty blessed with water. In the last couple of years, we've been maybe a little over-blessed with water, at least for short periods of time, and that's relates back to that the polar bears and the melting ice. So we've got funny things going on that are becoming one of the main challenges we're looking at into the future. On the quantity end, the Northeast, roughly half of the state, if you took a line from the northwest corner down to the southeast corner, that northeast half is fairly well off with regards to water. Watersheds are large. They capture water over a big area, and there's plentiful aquifers down below, and it all works pretty well. The southwest half of the state, not so much. The watersheds are small. The streams don't carry a lot of water. The aquifers are not very productive. The natural quality is very poor. And that actually goes a long way to explain why the population in that part of the state is much lower. Settlement there, Euro-American settlement there was much more difficult because there was not easy access to water. Yeah. So that's kind of where we sit on it. And from the quality end, those shallow resources, the streams and the shallow groundwater, again, the good news is they get replenished, recharged every time it rains or the snow melts. The bad news is they bring everything with them that is taking place on the land surface.
Meaning agricultural runoff.
Agricultural runoff, waste disposal, septic systems, the things we put in pits, ponds, and lagoons. Yeah, all the byproducts of society. We count on the earth as either as a filter to keep it out of the groundwater, or we treat it to some extent and we discharge it into streams. Mm-hmm. And so those shallow sources are impacted by what we do.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we had an earlier conversation about this, the what we do part of it. Speaking for a second about industry, if generally speaking, I think we think about economic development here in Iowa. We want more industry to come into the state. We want more people to have jobs. But there are serious environmental issues to address before somebody sets up a big industrial plant somewhere.
Yeah. There's a couple of things involved on the water end, and one is how much do you need? What quality does it have to be? And the other end is what do you do with it when you're done? Because all that water is never completely consumed or used up. There's wastewater involved. The amounts of water we have, again, if you're in that northeast part of the state, it's not too bad. Mm-hmm. Water in Iowa, actually, it's kind of interesting. Water is a state-controlled issue. So all the rules about water use are state-based. So there's 50 sets across the country. In Iowa, we don't have it like many the western states do, where they have a system called water rights. In Iowa, if you own property, you don't own the water under that. We all do. Okay, it's considered the wealth of the people of the state, and it's to be used for maximum beneficial use without being wasteful, which is kind of one of these. Who decides? Well, actually, there's an office within DNR that allocates water and tries to do so in a manner so that it will not interrupt other users, tries to do so that in those shallow sources, when the rain stops and the drought comes along, you haven't over-allocated the water and there's enough to go around. And with the deep sources, you don't have to worry about drought, but that water is not being replenished, and when you yank it out, it's very, very slow to come back. So those are kinds of the things we look at from that end. When they want to get rid of the water, there are some fairly straightforward federal regulations saying thou shalt not discharge more than these kinds of concentrations of this, that, and the other into these receiving water bodies. Those may be too strict from some people's point of view, too lax from others, but at least there are some standards in place there.
We sort of briefly talked about climate change, but there's climate and there's weather. And is it important to make a distinction between the two in terms of looking at sort of long-term issues here?
I was at a conference on climate change, and it was kind of interesting because that was the question some of the non-technical people were asking the climate scientists. They're going, I'm confused when you guys talk about this. Yeah. What is it? And I shouldn't say this in this audience. It was a bunch of university professor types. So they were giving these long, drawn-out explanations. And finally, this gal got up and said, look, think baseball, okay? Climate is your batting average. Weather is what you do this time at the plate, okay? So climate is what you can expect. Weather is what you get. And I like that better than the other descriptions I was hearing. Yeah. Climate change will affect Iowa directly in a couple of ways from the water end. Obviously, first of all, wetter or drier, and that's going to impact those shallow resources, the shallow groundwater, the streams. Yeah. If it gets wetter, buy more sandbags. If it gets drier, then we have to look at how we have to do that. Those deep sources aren't stressed by drought, and they're not going to be bothered by it. But if we become more dependent on them, then their operational lifespan just keeps decreasing because we're mining that water faster and faster. On the quality end, the largest water quality problems we have in state really relate to what most of the state is used for. And if you say the word Iowa to most of the world, you see a farm, and that's what 90% of our land is agricultural. About 2/3 of it is in row crop production, so corn and soybeans. That land receives every year lots of fertilizers, the manure from the hogs that outnumber us 6-1 in Iowa, 4 or 5 million dairy and beef cows, loads and loads of chickens. This is good fertilizer. It's fine. That's really kind of the roots of organic farming, but we've got a lot of it. Yeah. We've got a lot of it. And so a wetter climate, the wetter it is, the more sediment and bacteria and nutrients flush off the land or flush into the ground. Really wet weather is really bad water quality in Iowa. Really dry weather, we look a lot better.
What is the situation for Iowa sitting in the midst of all the states that surround us? Do we have water issues that are regulation issues between our state and other states? Not just a matter of heavy snowfall in Minnesota and we get
we get their water eventually, yes. There hasn't been a lot of that. Again, and some of that is because we, and particularly the states to the north and north, south, and east of us are also relatively water rich. So we don't have water wars going with them. Occasionally little border skirmishes, but that's about it. The biggest ones we have with other states are likely relates to the, say, quality of water issues on the Mississippi side and quantity over on the Missouri side, because that does go up into dry states. And if one of the upstream states wants to touch water, the downstream states are there, and they're all lawyered up real fast and say, you don't get to do that. Iowa's pretty much kind of kept their hands off it. We shouldn't be. We should be paying more attention to that.
What do you see as the biggest challenge for Iowa as we look at the next 20, 50 years?
I think the biggest challenges are, well, they're twofold. Number one, the roots of our water quality problems really boil down to what we use the land for, and that's agriculture. And we have a world with a growing population and growing food demands. And we're now looking at what we grow on the land is also becoming fuel. and that puts more and more stress on the soil resources and will impact that water quality end of things. And the other one is the whole specter of climate change. The folks who do the global models can't focus that down terribly well on what will happen here.
Right.
They seem to say we've got another 15 years of buying sandbags, and after that, the temperature humidity battle will, temperature will win, and we're going to dry out. And so there's those long-term concerns that way. And the other aspect is, what does climate change do to the rest of the world? When you sit on the world's most productive soils, if you've got some water to work them, they're going to be in hot demand. And right now, about 40% of the world's food comes from irrigated lands. And most of the climate models do suggest that those irrigated places that are dry to start with will be getting drier. What demands that shifts to Iowa is part of the question, and probably the most unpredictable part of one. But it's bound to be a large impact. Yeah.
And this takes me way back to grade school, and it's a stupid question I would have asked then. I'll just ask you now: is there any way to use the ocean's salty waters economically to produce food?
To produce food?
Well, food or what people
or just
need
for,
to live.
for whatever we want water
food.
for. Yeah, there are places that desalinize
Yeah.
water. It's expensive.
Yeah.
It's very energy intensive, and you end up with a lot of salt. Of course, you got an ocean to kind of hide it in, so that kind of works out. But it's a dollar cost.
Yeah.
It's just a dollar cost. There are places that do it, but then there are places who have that have looked at floating icebergs, because they'll retain enough before they melt and get them down somewhere warm and dry and use it that way.
Sure.
Southern California at one point in time was looking at tanker loads of water from the rivers coming off of British Columbia.
Yeah.
But it drives up costs, and then what?
Yeah.
How do you? In this country, we're pretty used to free access to water, very cheap. What comes out of the tap, you don't pay much for. Most of the world doesn't have that kind of luxury.
Yeah, right. And what comes out of the tap in Iowa, you feel confident that it's safe, it's had the right kind of treatment as it is moved into a human.
It's treated to the kinds of standards that are applied across the country. Whether that is as good as it should be is something that we always learn through time as they do more kind of tests on that kind of thing. I'm sure there's things coming through that tap that 30 years from now they will set some standards on that are lower than what we're drinking, but no one knows what those are.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, let me just ask, has Rob Quick arrived? I don't know Hi, Rob. Would you please join us up here? Rob Quick is coming, in fact, from a conference that's happening a little bit across campus here on this same topic, water. And Rob Quick is from the Centers for Disease Control. And I want to say thank you very much. I know you've just finished one presentation, so thanks for coming here. And you are a medical epidemiologist, I guess. And you work with foodborne diseases, diarrheal diseases, and so on.
Our group's called the Waterborne Diseases Prevention Branch.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about sort of an overview of what you do when you're investigating water and the things that happen related to water on a global perspective.
Well, there are several categories of things we do. One is we do respond to outbreak situations. I'm sure you've heard about the cholera outbreak in Haiti.
Yeah.
We were very involved in that. We go to these situations. We try to determine what the risk factors for transmission are, make recommendations to ministries of health to help them direct their prevention efforts. So we do that. We also develop interventions and test interventions to prevent waterborne disease around the world. Our particular group is international, so all of our work is outside of this country. We also work with ministries of health and the UN to develop norms for water treatment, water management, to all focused on preventing disease.
Right. Well, you've heard Bob's conversation about Iowa here. Does that sound, from, I know that you work internationally, but from what you know of the United States, does that sound like sort of the average picture of what's going on in this country, the kind of water issues we're facing? And if so, how different is that from what the rest of the world is looking at?
I think you can take the problems we have in the U.S. and just make them more extreme, and it really describes what you've got in the rest of the world. People say that water will be the new oil in the 21st century and that wars will be fought over oil. In fact, wars already are being fought over oil. With climate change, you have a lot of problems like glaciers retreating that feed these enormous rivers in Asia that are a main water source for the people. What's going to happen? What sources are they going to have? They also have very similar issues between drought and excess, flooding, and we're seeing more and more extreme weather events. It's interesting talking to farmers in other parts of the world who, for example, in Kenya where I work a lot, they say you cannot predict the weather anymore. There used to be the short rains and the long rains and then the dry season. Now you just can't tell, and they just rush out to plant things when the rains start coming.
Mm-hmm. So then help us understand how this affects food and the health, well-being. Take it just expand out from water and drought and all of that into what those cascading effects are when your water falls apart.
It really helps in a climate change situation like we're in now to be in a wealthy country with a lot of resources to buffer you from, the problems of drought and decreased food production, the ability to move food around and respond. When you're in resource-poor settings, it becomes very difficult to manage these problems. Food production is terribly affected. Right now, again, going back to Kenya, there's a drought going on now that's very serious, and famine is an issue. They're trying to figure out how to move food to the affected population. So they live on a much thinner margin of security than we do. So droughts are more of a problem, flooding is more of a problem, and you get these extreme floods like you had in Pakistan earlier this year, or I guess last year, and all the disruption of populations and food production and the disease it causes. So it's a serious problem, and the efforts to mitigate it are that much more difficult in situations where you don't have the resources.
Mm-hmm. Is there any reversing it? It sounds as though we're progressing toward a time where water will become less and less a dependable resource, or something we can, as you say, sort of schedule, in the sense that we'll have a lot this year, maybe less next year, but it'll always kind of come back. Are you imagining that, whether it's climate change or whatever else it might be, are we going towards something that cannot be reversed?
I'm not a climate scientist, but climate scientists that I've talked to are very concerned. I think we're in an area where nobody really knows what's going to happen, but the changes seem to be accelerating in people's opinions, in a lot of people's opinions. So I think it's going to, really, we'll see if we as humans can rise to the occasion and make some of the changes that we need to do to at least slow down the effects. Just, in the world, there about 3% of water is fresh water. 97% is salt water in the oceans. So that's what we're working with. And a lot of that's tied up in glaciers and other areas that is hard to access. And, of course, when it melts and it's gone, it tends to flow into the ocean. So, I think there's a good reason for everybody to be concerned. And it would be really nice if the people who make decisions in this society and in Europe and other places could make the hard decisions to wisely use resources and do the right thing to slow down climate change.
Mm-hmm. Do you have anything you want to add to that, Bob?
Yeah, I think, we've had these kinds of discussions, and people, there's almost two sides to the climate change end of it. They use the term mitigate. That means stop putting off as much CO2 into the atmosphere, and the other term is adapt. And we are already adapting because it's already going on. And some people ask, is it too late to mitigate? Well, it's too late to mitigate and stop what's already going on, and the path we're on that's going to carry us another 10 or 15 years in the future. But you just keep projecting that path out if we don't start mitigating now. So we're down the slope quite a ways, and anything we can do to stop us from going further is good. But yeah, we're in a bit of unknown territory even at this point.
This is a slightly different topic, but I'll ask you what your thoughts are in the situation in Japan, this television moment where the mayor of Tokyo took the drink of the water and declared it to be safe today, whereas the day before it was apparently declared dangerous, at least for babies. I mean, what does a population need to know when a crisis like that happens? And maybe in Japan there's enough bottled water available to get people through a little bit of a crisis. But if water has been affected by the radiation, what kind of timeline are they looking at before we might all feel comfortable with drinking it?
This is another one of those situations that, have we really been there before? Do we really know what's going to happen? I mean, there's been Chernobyl, there's been 3 Mile Island. This is a different situation. They all are. We do know that the radiation is in the food supply. It's in some of the produce they're growing. They found it in milk. They have found it in water. From what I've read, it appears that it's not at a level that would put, say, an adult at risk. You can remove some of the radiation from the radioactive material from the water through flocculation and filtering and that sort of thing. I don't know if you can remove it all. There are strategies they can use, but I think there's reason to be concerned, and I would really want to, if I lived there, I would want the government, the water authority, to be monitoring this very closely. But from what I've read to this point, I don't think they're at a real crisis point to where the water is completely unusable.
Yeah, good. Well, let's hope not. Mm-hmm. If we have concluding thoughts, anything else you'd like to say, I want to say thank you very much for coming to join us and this big water conference that's being held here. I know people are speaking on the topic from many different points of view. A number of international scholars are here. And do you expect to hear anything sort of surprising? Are you waiting to hear some data delivered that will show you something shocking, or no?
I would love to hear somebody say that they have the answer, the silver bullet for treating water in the developing world. We've been waiting for this. We have lots of strategies, but nothing is really there. So I would love to hear something like that.
Well, you'll let us know, of course, if something is said. So, Rob Quick, thank you, and Bob Libra, thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so we'll invite our next guests up now as they come. I am Joan Kerr. Yes, that's you, Lori and Viraj. And so I'm Joan Kerr. If you've just joined us, this is WorldCanvass from International Programs, and our program tonight is called Starving for Water. If you'd like to hear this program again, there are numerous places in which you'll be able to find it. On cable systems around the state, thanks to our friends and partners at UI-TV, on our local UI radio station, KRUI-FM, and on Iowa Public Radio statewide. We also post the program for free internet listening on the site, the Public Radio Exchange. So let me introduce now the two people who just joined me. Lori Graham, nice to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Viraj Thacker, good to have you with us. So I'll start with you, Laura. You're an associate professor of anthropology here at the University of Iowa. Your current research, I guess, focuses on the politics of indigenous representation to broad publics, and you focus on indigenous peoples in South America. I know that you have worked as part of the team on the Film Owners of the Water. So let's learn a little bit about the work you do as an anthropologist in South America.
Well, I didn't actually initially start out looking at water, but came to it because it is such a huge issue in the area of Brazil where I work with a group called the Chavante. And they are, along with the Yanomami, one of the most well-known groups in Brazil internationally, although you may not have heard of them. There's about 14,000 of them now. And they live in the central Brazilian plateau, which is a savanna, or cerrado is what it's called in Portuguese area. And there's been a lot of attention to the rainforest in the Amazon rainforest, the lungs of the world, how deforestation in the Amazon is affecting climate change, the lungs of the world, and so on. And the Amazon itself is really a complex area. There's the rainforest area, which is right along the Amazon River, and also the tributaries to the Amazon itself. But much of the drainage to the Amazon and the major tributaries to the Amazon come out of the Cerrado, the central Brazilian plateau area. And this is an area that is having the world's largest agricultural boom now, and that is in soy. So it may feel like in Iowa that we're very disconnected from what's going on in central Brazil, but in fact, the same kinds of processes that Robert talked about are happening there, but really without any government regulation. And a very compressed time span going from 0 to 150 in terms of mechanized agribusiness. So I started working with the Chavante in the early 1980s, and it was extremely remote. It took me days to get there. There was the beginnings of the Trans-Amazon Highway, but it was not paved. There weren't bridges in place. And during the rainy season, because this is an area where there is, or historically has been, a very defined wet and dry season. And now that's changing. In fact, the last couple of years, there's been a major drought in the area. So it was very difficult to get there, and there wasn't much around it. There were some cattle ranches. But now it feels like really going to a different planet there. There are big agricultural, it feels like driving around in Iowa. In fact, the last time that I was there, I came directly from central Brazil up to Iowa City and drove out to Okoboji for, I think it was Labor Day weekend or something. And as I drove across the northern part of the state, I was seeing the same kind of landscape as in central Brazil, with huge grain elevators and big warehouses, lots of machinery. And this is an area that 20 years ago, there was nothing there at all. And so what's been happening is the implementation of huge ranches or farms. The soil is not rich like in Iowa. It's lateritic soil filled with a lot of acids and huge amounts of chemical pesticides, nitrates in fertilizers need to be used. And so ranchers have been coming in and planting huge areas. And this all just began really in the 1980s. And what made the change was the development of soy that was resistant to the temperatures in the Amazon. And that coincided with the occurrence of mad cow disease and the demand for soy rising worldwide. And so this agricultural boom that's happening in Brazil, and Brazil is now the world's largest soy exporting country, and Mato Grosso, which is where the Chavante live, is the largest soy producing area in Brazil. So it's growing exponentially virtually without government regulation, heavy use of chemical pesticides. And ranchers, for example, will wash their pesticide application machinery in the rivers. And this will cause fish kills that go on for kilometers. And one rancher told me that he had contacted IBAMA, which is the Environmental Protection Agency in Brazil. In the whole Amazon area, there were only 2 agents who are responsible for documenting and implementing fines and so on. So no one ever checked it out. So how I specifically came to this is through my research with an indigenous group and the way that they use culture in a broader arena, the way they're trying to have other communities be aware of them and of their struggles. And so looking at their cultural presentations to outsiders, how they have taken rituals out of traditional contexts and put them on stage, literally, tour around. This one group has been to the Festival d'Avignon, the Venice Biennale, and so on. There's a lot of interest in traditional cultures. And one of the things they are doing is using their culture to bring attention to the political struggles that they have. And the devastation of the Cerrado environment because of soy agribusiness is the big issue there. And so one of the events that I was documenting, I was invited down to come help tell the story about this one group's campaign to save the Cerrado. And they began looking at the destruction that soy ranching was doing in adjacent areas to their reserves, which are protected. But of course, they're not entirely protected because pesticides will be used in a ranch, and then the rivers flow through the indigenous areas. And that's what these people drink. There's no water filtration system. There's no municipal water supply that treats it for them. So they bathe there. They drink the water. They use the water in many of their rituals. It's really celebrated as a source of life for them. It's very meaningful in terms of their cosmology, the beliefs about the world. So they want to bring attention to what's happening, and they invited me to come document this. And of course, they can tell their own story. But I think having an academic from the first world was something that gives a little, in the local context, some kind of political cachet. So they are doing an act. They actually put on a demonstration, blocked a bridge across one of the tributaries that goes right through their area that is being contaminated. And they wanted to bring attention to this at the local level, but also the governor of the state is the world's largest soy rancher. So policy in Brazil does not favor environmental and water protection. And so they wanted the governor to know that they're aware of the effects of water on their livelihoods. They want better regulation. And so they staged this protest, blocked one of the major highways for agricultural transportation that takes the soy and other agricultural produce out of central Brazil to major commercial centers like the ports on the Amazon that will ship it to China and Japan and so on. And this was a really fascinating event, and I had brought with me an indigenous person from Venezuela who lives in a very arid region, which is just the opposite of central Brazil, which has got, during the rainy season, lots and lots of water. And I thought it would be interesting for these members of two different indigenous groups that have different kinds of problems with water to come together and, exchange ideas. And so they held up the traffic on the bridge. It was a very peaceful protest. And this film called Owners of the Water, which we'll be screening tomorrow at 1, I think, it has been, the film process itself was very interesting, the exchange about water between the two indigenous groups, and the attention that it brought locally, but also globally, to this things that I had never anticipated. We made this film because it was such a rich and very politically salient event. We thought, we need to let people see what happened here in this remote area of Brazil. We put up press releases. Those press releases were taken up. There was an NPR program that aired some of that. Japanese TV documentary was done on central Brazil, and because of this, they came and documented what's happening with the Chavante. And the film has taken on a life of its own. It's been at the Smithsonian Native Film Festival. It's been in Nepal. It's been all around the world, bringing attention to the water struggle in central Brazil by a very small indigenous group.
Yeah. Is it your sense that this will make a difference for these people, the international attention, that there will be support for the indigenous people's rights, or is it just one more sad event where the indigenous peoples in fairly short order will find that, life moves on and they're left behind?
Well, I think one of the things that's really important to recognize about indigenous peoples or any community that we think of as impoverished, that they are agents. They are people who are taking action, even if it's very small kinds of resistance at the local level. And so when we made this film, we didn't necessarily expect that it would. In fact, it was shown to Al Gore as part of his prep materials before he went to Brazil. So that's been really gratifying. I think that they want it to be known internationally, but they're constantly taking steps to bring attention to what's happening there. And there are situations in the world that get a lot of attention. For example, in central Brazil, there is a plan to put over 120 hydroelectric dams on rivers. So one of the big ones is Belo Monte that many people have heard about. James Cameron was down there. Those campaigns to stop a dam get a lot of attention. The kinds of campaigns, and there's many, many of them all over the world, need attention, and there are activists working, and those activists make connections with other people, and that's what's happening in central Brazil. The indigenous peoples who live in small communities are beginning to realize that because of the soy agriculture, because of the kinds of contamination that's happening in the water, they share common cause with other indigenous peoples, with other riverine peoples, and they're not alone. And that's what's happening, and that's, I think, what's really exciting, is that the networks are building. And as they realize that they have allies elsewhere in the world, they put pressure on us. For example, I can't just be an academic that goes down there and documents their stuff. I have a responsibility to make what's happening there known, to let people know about what's going on. And all of those things, I think, can give us some hope, and they're very exciting.
Oh, thank you, Laurie. That's tremendous to hear about it. And let's bring Viraj into this conversation as well. You mentioned Nepal. Viraj is from Nepal. And just give you a small introduction, Viraj Thacker is the author of The Myth of Prosperity, Globalization and the South. And you're going to talk about globalization, development, South Asia. You are also the executive director for Manushi for Sustainable Development, an NGO based in Kathmandu. So welcome, Viraj. And
thank you, Joan.
Tell us something about, maybe you can react to what Laurie said.
Well, I agree with most of what she said, and I think in the world today, the media and generally people don't want to hear about these issues, although there is a lot happening. And climate change is a hard issue to digest. And I focused in my book on India with I call it the myth of prosperity, because India is one of the newly emerging economies where a lot of focus is shown on the prosperity that is happening in India. But when I did my dissertation on this topic, I was told that I was going against the tide writing about such issues, but I insisted on sticking with it. And I think I'm starting to prove right now where India is emerging, where India is having some troubles in its economics. And down the line, we'll see that the environment will be a big problem. And the biggest closet in the skeleton that they have is their population, which the two things always clash. So.
Yeah. What is particularly unique about the stresses on the environment, water particularly, in the area you studied?
Well, what's unique, my study was more had to do with international relations, the North-South divide. But if you look specifically, one thing that stands out in that whole belt is the retreat of Himalayan glaciers, which are retreating at a very alarming rate. And people don't take note of this, or even the minor temperature increases that are happening. For example, if we even have a 1 degree Celsius increase, that's going to affect glaciers where they're going to retreat by 50 meters a year. So I think that's a big issue when you have billions of people involved, where already you have limited access to water and sanitation, and this just adds to the problem and aggravates it much more.
Well, when we talked a week or so ago, you mentioned a beautiful area, an area you knew as a child that now seems only a shadow of its former self.
Yeah, and that is the Kathmandu Valley, which, if you go back in the 1950s, was supposedly called the last Shangri-La that was left. But I've seen in the last 45 years the changes in that valley. Of course, a lot has to do with the Maoist conflict in Nepal, and also the role of donors, where donors initially were much more active in Nepal in hands-on issues. Now donors have kind of learned to do in Rome as the Romans do, where they back off from politics, where they need to come in. And I say this also for the USAID, which could have a much larger role in Nepal, influencing Nepali politics in the right way, but that is not happening, unfortunately. And that beautiful valley we speak about is now a terrible mess. So that's what you see when you go there. So
Right. So what's the way out? What needs to happen in Nepal, in India?
Well, I think it all eventually goes back to us as individuals, knowing that all of this is happening in the world. The environment is a problem, and as our other distinguished speakers said, it's something we don't have a grip on. But what we do have a grip on is the awareness that if we consume less, think about the billions of people in the world that don't have anything, something can be done. And I think it goes back to that kind of personal philosophy of sustainability, and also taking it up as an individual challenge, which will also give the right message to our future generations. And I sincerely feel in all my research that it keeps coming back to the philosophical question where if you don't do that, you really don't know what you're heading for. And I think some of that has come out in the disaster in Japan, where we think we have a grip, but in reality, it remains to be seen.
Laurie, any reactions to what Viraj has talked about in Nepal?
Well, it makes me think about just the rapidity of the transformation. When you mention the last Shangri-La, this is happening. It's happening in central Brazil. It's happening in so many places. And we really do need to think about ways that we can, in our own daily lives, make a difference.
Absolutely. Especially when you see, the example I give is that, a bath full of water, bath water, which we use in one bath. If you translate that to a slum in India, Nepal, Brazil, or any other place in the world, you can have a community of 1,000 people that'll use that water in one day. So these are the kind of equations I'm talking about. So I certainly feel that in our own lives, if we decide to consume a little less, and that becomes a priority for a larger group of people, it's going to impact the world in a positive way. But until we don't do that, I'm afraid we're heading in a direction that we don't really know much about. So.
Right. Well, there was an article that Bob Libra wrote for in advance of this program that was titled, if I remember correctly, Bob, I think you called it Water, Human Right, or Liquid Asset. And I guess we've already heard in this program people discuss it from both sides. But you clearly believe that it is a human right for people to have usable water and sanitation and whatnot.
I guess this is the big question that is in debate and has been for some time, because the two ways of looking at it are either water is a human need, which is the corporate way to go. So if it becomes a human need, then it's subject to becoming a commodity for trade, meaning governments kind of lay their hands off. But if it's defined as a human need, as opposed to human right, if it's a human right, then mandatory government policies activated to ensure that there's unconditional access for everyone, which kind of puts corporations into accountability. And I think that's what we want to see more of. And we just have to hope and keep our fingers crossed that it stays that way, where water remains a human right. So.
Well, thank you so much, both of you, for sharing these interesting and sort of related stories. So thank you. And good luck with Owners of the Water and also with your book, Viraj. Thank you so much for joining us. Excuse me, is Chris Burrish here? Did Chris Burrish make it? Oh, thank you so much. We'll move into the next segment. I think Chris hasn't made it. And here is a copy of Viraj Thacker's book, The Myth of Prosperity, Globalization, and the South. And I hope if any of you are interested in reading this book, you'll take a look at it later on. So please come on up, Alexandra and Cliff Missen and Matt Ohloff, Alexandra Douglas, and Cliff Missen are joining us now. Please give them a hand as they get settled. So we'll start with you, Alexandra. Tell us a little bit about the work you do in Burundi.
Definitely. I work with an organization called the Friends Women's Association, which is a grassroots organization which was founded by and for Burundian women during the height of the Civil War, which went from 1993 until 2005, who wanted to work together to improve one another's lives. And it was a group of women who had gathered and met one another during a workshop which was focused on recovering from trauma from the war and the intersection that trauma has with HIV/AIDS, and especially through sexual violence, use of rape as a tactic of war. And these group of women gathered and they said, what can we do to empower one another and help each other both through the period of war and once we go out of war and move into the post-conflict period. And so they began looking at the various issues and the unique ways that war affects women in both the conflict and post-conflict environment. They were looking at poverty, disease, sexual violence, HIV/AIDS, and wondering what can we do. And through that, they decided that public health would be the entry point into women's empowerment. And so today we have a health clinic in Kamenge, which is a northern slum of the capital city, and it's important to talk about the location in which we work, because Kamenge during the war was considered the rebel stronghold. And even today you feel this very tense stigmatization. When I tell people as a white woman that I work in Kamenge, people go, oh my gosh, you shouldn't go there. Because to this day, many of the larger NGOs, the UN, the Red Cross, they will actually say that their workers cannot go into this area because of the historical context of violence. And yet, the reason that this group of women chose to work there was for precisely that reason. We need to be working in the context to begin to mitigate conflict, to address, crucial public health issues, to address the structural issues that underlie violence. And so when we talk about water, we're approaching it from a public health perspective. I always find it interesting as for me being a foreign worker, I came from working in Bolivia, actually, and working very closely with the water rights movement there. And I remember we used to always say, el agua es la vida, water is life. And I think that's very true when we translate that into another context like Burundi. Because what we're seeing in Burundi is not necessarily the same question of the privatization of water, but we're seeing what impact water has on public health. And so today, when we talk about water in Burundi, we're seeing the crisis that's being created from both global climate change and, as others have already talked about, the shifts in the rains and the cycles, but also the effects of war with the deforestation that happened when mass populations were displaced. They were looking for firewood as they fled civil war, they fled massacres, and the deforestation has caused a degradation of the soil that is making it harder and harder to produce foods. And so especially in an area like where we work, which is a slum, and we're talking about access to clean water and access to good foods combined with the after effects of war and very high levels of disease like HIV/AIDS, we begin to see the struggles of people finding nutritional foods to eat. In the area where I work, there are actually only 9 water spigots to service the entire community, which is roughly 52,000 people. And so if you can imagine 52,000 people trying to access 9 water spigots at a time, what do you do? And so part of our work is trying to build sustainable solutions and also looking at health as an entry point into whole well-being. And so rather than taking this sectoral approach to begin to say, how do we look at the entire context of one woman or one family and begin to see a sustainable future and a long-term piece. And so the way that we do that is that we work by addressing primary care needs, but then we also integrate all of our patients into social assistance programs. And so we focus on microfinance to address the socioeconomic issues, which help get access to better foods, nutritional foods. Through that, we also focus on urban gardens. And through a partner organization called the Healing and Rebuilding Our Communities Project, we're also working on building water sanitation biosand filters. That this project actually works with former combatants as a way of reintegration, but also working on critical issues like water access and safe water, and to begin to work with a very stigmatized community to provide a vital asset, which then helps with that longer-term reconciliation within a country that has been so torn apart by civil war.
Wow, what an amazing project. And I think it's great. How many people work with you in the clinic?
We're 13 members on our staff, so we're very small, we're very grassroots. I'm the only international staff member, and so otherwise we're an entirely locally grown. And I always like to emphasize that part of the power of what we do is that we are community-based, because down to the very bricks that our clinic was built out of, they were formed out of the mud and fired on a kiln on our property. And it's the community who has come together since 2002, and I always say in Burundi, you start operating out of a building as soon as you have two walls and a piece of metal thrown over the top. But since 2002, we've expanded, and now we have, I think, 9 rooms that are servicing in our clinic, and we're in the process of expanding even further.
Wow. So how does the government involve itself in, for example, assisting communities to create more wells or whatever? Are there projects like this happening in Burundi?
It's a very difficult question. I mean, Burundi is in a very precarious position globally, because both if you think about its context and its location, it's surrounded by many of the giants. You've got the Democratic Republic of Congo, you've got Kenya, you've got Tanzania, and many of these areas are very resource rich, and yet both Burundi and Rwanda are extremely resource poor. There are virtually no natural resources to speak of in Burundi, and so Burundi is very dependent on foreign aid, particularly bilateral and multinational aid. I always give the example that today in the cash economy, it requires that we have crops. The two most cash-producing crops in Burundi are coffee and tea, which together produce somewhere around 75 or 80% of the cash flow of the gross national product. I always get GNP and GDP confused. But with that, that's about $300 million of the money that's being circulated in country. And that's out of about $750 million that are in the country. And so the rest of that money is predominantly coming through bilateral and multinational aid, as well as the NGOs that are working. And so the government projects are being funded by outside, but truthfully, there's not enough being done. And the government is taking measures to work with this, because a lot of the issues that we're seeing are maternal and child deaths. Child mortality is very closely linked to waterborne disease. And the government has made efforts with foreign aid to try and provide free maternal and child health care, but then we're seeing the reverse effects of that, even though if we talk about the Millennium Development Goals, sometimes Burundi is stated as a success story of actually improving child mortality. And yet in 2010, we saw that the government actually wasn't able to pay clinics and hospitals for the free services that they were providing. So it's a very complicated situation that I sometimes struggle to find the answer to, and yet I continually come back to this hope that I see when I work with individuals and communities and see individual lives that are changed with projects like ours, and we see one family that's breaking out of this cycle and beginning to eat good foods and have access to safe water.
Right. Well, I think it's a very natural connection to Cliff Missen's project, Wellspring Africa, different part of Africa that you primarily have worked in, but tell us about Wellspring Africa and this contraption you brought with us just sitting off behind you.
Yeah. So, Wellspring Africa is an organization I founded back in 1984. I had worked in a clinic in a village in a remote part of Liberia in 82, and the bulk of the things that we were treating was from either a lack of water during the dry season or poor quality water during the wet season. I tried to convince the villagers to dig a well, because I had homesteaded in Alaska when I was young, and that's what we did. But it turns out that these particular folks believed in evil spirits in the ground, and so nobody was interested in climbing into a 60-foot hole and meeting evil spirits. So I came back to the States with the challenge of finding a way to make a hole, to drill a hole. And interestingly, I was in the capital city, Monrovia, and the U.S. AID people are like, oh, well, we can get a helicopter and bring in a truck. Because this village I was in was 5 hours away from the nearest road. So all these grand ideas, but I was interested in finding out the simple, small-scale ways of doing this, and hit the history books out at the Evergreen State College with some of my colleagues there, and we went back to look at how people have been drilling wells over time. And turns out one of the most dangerous places to live on the planet, in the history of the planet, was London in the early 1700s. You know, lots of spoiled surface water and people dying from all kinds of diseases, right? What changed was Marco Polo's men wandering off to China, where since 1100 BC, they'd been drilling deep wells using these very tools right here. And they went, learned these technologies, brought them back to Europe, sunk the first deep wells in Paris and London. Thomas Jefferson used these tools to drill a well here in America. And thank you, Peter. You make it look easy. And even up into the late 1800s, people were drilling oil wells in Oklahoma using this very technology, hand-powered percussion. And then as steam engines came along, these designs just got larger and bigger, and this technology almost disappeared. So we've been recapturing the technology, retooling it using more modern materials, and training people around the world on how to drill water wells. So we can go anywhere in the world for less than $250 out of local materials, build a drill, and go 300-400 feet. And so that's what Wellspring Africa is about. We've written a book on the subject. Actually, I'm really proud of this. This just came out this last week, working with the Practica Foundation in the Netherlands on putting together manuals for small-scale drillers. Yeah. And this is one of the issues. Of the billion people in the world who are still left without water, 85% of them are in rural areas. And there's just, the economics don't work to take big, large, expensive, multi-million-dollar trucks into rural areas and drill wells. And so there's a group of us working, Enterprise Works, the Practica Foundation, UNICEF, others working on building up cadres of local, what we call artisanal drillers, people who can, on the local economy, using tools that can be afforded by the villagers, drill deep, safe wells on their local economy. So I was in Niger 2 summers ago. Been working in Tanzania, training drillers there. And now we've gone even beyond that. At this point, I'm less interested in training well drillers as I'm interested in training water entrepreneurs. Because it's not so much how to drill a well. I can teach somebody how to drill a well in a few days. Okay? The issue is how to work with the villagers to make all of the decisions about who's going to manage this well, how they're going to use the water, about putting together the finances, about pulling together the resources that are available, a free pump from the government, some instructional materials for the teachers, how to do all of that, all of the logistics of making a water source, and then creating water sources and having them last for years. So that is more than just training somebody to drill a well. It's about training people to make it their business. Sort of like we have the Culligan man here in the U.S., right? Somebody who's that's their business. They set up water wells and they maintain them and teach people how to keep them going.
Yeah. Now, when these drills do locate the water, they suddenly have a working well. I'm sorry, I don't know enough about testing water to make sure that it's safe and clean and good and whatnot. Does one just assume that if you go down 300 feet and water comes up, it's safe?
Not necessarily. There are a lot of concerns. If you go down 300 feet, you may be tapping into lime water, all kinds of stuff that would actually be dangerous for folks. The closer the water is to the surface, if it's too close to the surface, you got trouble with bacteria. If it's too deep, you got problems with other things that might be down there. Mm-hmm. So you can't really call it. But in some of the areas we work, we'll get water, we'll test it, and if we find water at a particular level fairly consistently mm-hmm. and it tests out fine, then we'll just say go for it. Mm-hmm. The ideal, of course, if we had the money, it would be to test every water source. But that's, sometimes we just get a 55-gallon drum full of water, pour in a gallon of bleach, pour it down the hole to inject the water, leave it down there for a couple of days, mm-hmm. pump it out and say, close enough, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. But that's if we look back at our history of how we developed water sources around Iowa, how we developed water sources around the world, people weren't testing their water even 50 years ago, right? So this roll of the dice is likely the water's better than the surface water.
Yeah. Oh, well, thanks for telling us about that. Does that have any implications, do you think, for Burundi?
Actual access to water isn't as big of an issue just because we're right next to Lake Tanganyika, which is actually one of the largest supplies of fresh water in the world. And so we don't have the same questions of actually needing to drill, but sometimes it's getting the water out to some of the rural villages. I mean, and even though Burundi is a very small geographic area, it's very mountainous. And so sometimes, even though there is water available, getting it up a hill could be a 4-hour walk for some people that I know, depending on where you're living. And I don't know much about drilling in mountains and how far down you would have to go to reach a water source in that, but it would be an interesting question, though I've not heard of well projects as commonly in Burundi because of the proximity of fresh water that's more on a surface level.
Well, let's bring you into the conversation. Matt Ohloff, you're here from Food and Water Watch, and you're the Iowa coordinator of Food and Water Watch. Tell us what your organization is and does.
Food and Water Watch, we're a national consumer advocacy organization based out of Washington, D.C. We work on a lot of domestic policies, so it's interesting to get a global perspective today. We do believe that our food and water resources are a human right and that they're public resources that need to be protected. So the mission of our organization is to defend and protect our food and water resources and fight against the corporate abuse and corporate control of our food and water resources. So we are very fortunate here in America to have water at our tap in most homes and residences around the country. Unfortunately, right now what we're seeing is a crumbling infrastructure of our drinking water resources. We made huge investments generations ago to make sure everybody had safe, healthy, affordable drinking water. Over the decades, we have not maintained that infrastructure, and especially now with the economic collapse and city governments facing budget crisis, a lot of cities are looking at selling and leasing their utilities to private corporations. So we are fighting to prevent that. We also have a campaign called Take Back the Tap, where we educate folks on the myths and ills of bottled water and the fact that we need to reinvest in our drinking water infrastructure instead of supporting bottled water use. One interesting thing to talk about, since folks are talking, we're talking about international issues, is that the jig is somewhat up in the Western world, in Canada, the United States, and the European Union around bottled water. Sales are declining since 2007, but in order to make up the profit margins, these bottled water companies, Nestle, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, they're marketing towards developing countries. That's where their profit margins are going up, and towards recent immigrants here in the United States, because they're not accustomed to having accessible drinking water. They still hold perceptions that tap water and drinking water is unsafe. So that's one interesting thing to think about around the bottled water issue.
So as devil's advocate, give me the other side of the argument. Why should we not think of water as, sort of common property, part of the commons of our planet? Why should we not privatize water?
I think somebody mentioned it earlier that water is life. We depend on water to survive. And once it's commodified and folks are unable to afford higher priced water, it's the end of life for some people. So it's a necessity, and it's something that needs to be controlled by the public, in public hands.
How do you feel the mood in Congress is, for example, the current Congress toward the issues you're working on?
That's a good question. With the budget crisis I mentioned on the local municipal level, in Congress right now there are severe budget cuts being proposed. One of the ways that municipal water sources get funding to maintain and upgrade their infrastructure is through state revolving funds, and those are being cut substantially in the proposed budgets, working their way through Congress. The Obama's budget is not as bad, but it's still pretty bad. So we're looking at some serious budget shortfalls on the national level. So once again, we're pushing, Food and Water Watch, we're pushing for legislation to be passed through Congress that we're calling Renew America's Water, and it would essentially close the funding gap between what drinking water utilities have around the country, which is, and what they need, which is $25 billion. It's a $25 billion gap. We want to close that gap and make sure that we're able to have safe drinking water for generations to come.
One of the effects I see around, because in my day job, I travel all over sub-Saharan Africa, and I've been to 24 universities, and not one of them had safe drinking water coming from the tap. This is how serious the water problem is in sub-Saharan Africa. And what happens is that wealthy families buy distillers, and they buy filters, and they buy bottled water. And so they're not out there advocating for public utilities to provide water to everybody. They have sort of removed themselves from the argument. So it's really only the poor left to argue for water. I was in a city where there was the water board had gone on strike, and they've been on strike for 3 weeks, and people were, the women in the neighborhood were getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to go down to the water holes down around the rivers, and literally fights broke out every morning. These women who've known each other all their lives were stressed by standing for hours in line to get a little bit of water to take home to their family. People were so desperate, these huge pipes that were going through town, the big 30, 40-inch pipes that were carrying water, people were breaking them open with hammers just to get a handful of water. And so when the water finally came back on, there were geysers everywhere. And it took months to put the water system back together. So we just don't understand how incredibly lucky we are to be able to turn on a tap and drink the water and feel that's reasonably safe. The water industry is sort of, it's sucking the oxygen out of the room. It's making it less likely that the wealthy people of these communities are going to argue for whole community water systems.
We actually have great concerns in Burundi about the potential privatization of water, because you did ask what was the government doing. The proximity of Lake Tanganyika as one of the world's largest freshwater sources is actually, there is concern, will the government begin to contemplate the privatization of the water? And one current example that kind of had all of us on edge for a while was, we actually, I think, in Bujumbura, and this is only the capital city, it does not expand outwards, do drink the water from the tap in Bujumbura. It is purified. But they recently did sell the spring that the water originally came from to the company Kinju. And for a while, we actually saw a rise, and this is a bit anecdotal because the monitoring and evaluation is not the best in Burundi, but we saw a rise in typhoid and other waterborne diseases during that time. And it seems like, at least in Bujumbura, they've rectified the problem of having more diseases in the water with the change of the water source, but it is a potential problem as governments will look to how are they going to fund larger solutions, and looking to the privatization of water as one answer.
Well, and when you look outward from your clinic and you're dealing with a lot of health issues, and you see a rise in something like typhoid, what can you do to call attention to the immediate need? If you still have very limited resources, but you've got an issue developing around you, who do you go to?
Well, we try and work in as many coalitions as we possibly can. Over the years, we've also worked very hard to develop relationships with the local chiefs, with the local administrators, as well as the Ministry of Health at both the district and the national level. And so when we begin to see concerns, we're first going to talk to our partners, and then we're going to come together and we're going to talk to the administrators, we're going to talk to the Ministry of Health, and really try and use this grassroots organizing method to try and apply pressure to the government, but as well as the international organizations, because the way that dynamics and politics work in a development setting, oftentimes you have to do advocacy with the larger institutions as much as you do with the government, because the government is so dependent on the larger institutions.
I think this goes back to what Viraj was saying with what he's seen in Nepal. What is your nearest goal, Matt?
On the waterfront, it is that Renew America's Water that's establishing a trust fund to make sure that drinking water utilities have adequate funding to maintain and upgrade their drinking water infrastructure. On the food front, I mean, it was mentioned earlier about agricultural runoff. I don't mean to veer the conversation that way, but we just geared up our Fair Farm Bill campaign. The Farm Bill is scheduled to be reauthorized in Congress in 2012, and our food system is broken here in the United States because of previous farm bills not benefiting family farmers and instead benefiting corporate agribusiness. And we are pushing for a farm bill that makes sure that farmers get a fair price, that consumers have access to safe, healthy, affordable foods, and that we have diversified farms. As a result, this would reduce the agricultural runoff. We wouldn't have as much industrialized farming operations as we do right now. Mm-hmm. So that's a major goal that we'll be working on here in Iowa. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how much time we have, but if anybody's interested, visit foodandwaterwatch.org. And if you're interested in getting involved locally, check out the website.
Thank you. And what were you going to say, Cliff? It looked as though you were getting ready to say something.
Well, I was just thinking a couple of things to sort of circle back on some of the conversations we've had about global warming. I just wanted to share, I was in Tanzania a couple of summers ago working with some well drilling folks there. And I visited a number of villages that were along the coast. And the villagers, I visited probably 100 wells. The villagers, I mean, we spent 2 days just walking around looking at dry wells. And they would say, this is the well that my great-grandfather built, blah, 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 back in the early 1900s or whatever. And they're all dry, 100+ wells, and so they were going to be using our technology to try to go into the old wells and drill deeper. But it's a huge area in which a large number of wells are just drying up. And the villagers are really looking at having to relocate their villages. I was in Bangladesh last year, and just for kicks, on the weekends I like to go out and just visit people in the rural areas. And I'm driving around. I hired a driver. We're out in the farmlands, and I notice it's in between planting season, and there's a bunch of people carrying dirt, just like picking up mud, carrying it up a hill and dumping it. And so I stopped and I started asking some questions. And they said the floods have been terrible for the last 10 years. And it's wiping things out. So what they're doing, they're digging up their farm fields and piling it up so they can move their houses higher so their houses don't get wiped out. So these are some of the real effects of this climate change. And the poorest people and people nearest the oceans are the ones who are going to be facing the most devastation.
Well, I'm so grateful you all would come and talk about this tonight. This is terrific, and a lot of different perspectives we've heard from everyone. So I thank you very much. One of our previously imagined guests was Chris Burrish, but he must have run into trouble. He's an emergency physician, and he's not here with us. So we're going to end the program a little bit early tonight, but I want to say thank you to all of you for coming. Thank you, Bob Libra and Rob Quick, and the three of you, Viraj and Lori. Wherever you are, Lori, thank you so much. I'm Joan Kerr. This is WorldCanvass, and we want to say thank you to all of you for coming. Also to Stephen and David, of course, for the concert at the beginning of the show. Our next WorldCanvass program will be back in the Senate chamber where we usually are, and that's on April 8th, and we'll be talking about women in post-communist Eastern Europe. I think it'll be a real interesting show, so I hope some of you can come. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you, Viraj. Good night. Thank you.